That letter should never have reached his hands, but fate, as always, had other plans. Don Sebastian had spent 43 years delivering mail in the town of San Isidro del Valle. 43 years walking the same cobblestone streets, greeting the same families, watching entire generations grow up. His legs were no longer what they used to be. His hands trembled slightly when he held envelopes, and his eyes needed thick glasses to read addresses. But every morning, without fail, he would wake before dawn, put on his blue uniform worn by time, and go out to fulfill his duty. Because for Don Sebastian, delivering letters wasn't just a job. It was his way of keeping the heart of the town alive. If this story has already touched your heart in the first few seconds, I invite you to subscribe. But stay, because the most important part is about to be revealed. That October morning was different. The air carried the sweet aroma of dry leaves and the murmur of wind through the century-old trees bordering the main square. Don Sebastian had finished sorting the day's letters when, at the bottom of his worn leather bag, he found an envelope he hadn't seen before. It was made of yellowed paper, as if it had traveled from another time. It had no return address, no destination. Only one phrase written in black ink, in an elegant ancient calligraphy. For whoever needs it most. The old mailman stood motionless for several seconds, holding that envelope between his trembling fingers. In more than 4 decades of service, he had never encountered anything like it. Letters always had a clear destination, a name, an address. But this letter seemed to be waiting for him to make a decision. How had it gotten there? Who had written it? And most importantly, to whom should he deliver it? Don Sebastian tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart, and began his usual route. But as he walked through the streets of San Isidro, his mind couldn't stop thinking about that mysterious letter. Every time he stopped to deliver an envelope, he looked at the recipients with different eyes. Was this person the one who needed it most, or that other one? He passed by Doña Carmen's bakery, where the aroma of freshly baked bread mixed with the steam escaping from the windows. Doña Carmen was a woman who had been widowed for 10 years, but she always had a smile for everyone. No, thought Don Sebastian, she doesn't seem to need anything. Her heart is full of peace. He continued to Mr. Gonzalo's hardware store, a taciturn man who had lost his wife the previous year. Gonzalo was always busy organizing screws and nails, avoiding long conversations. Maybe him, the mailman thought. But something inside told him it wasn't the right time. He kept walking, passing by the elementary school where children played in the yard during recess. Their laughter filled the air like crystal bells. Don Sebastian stopped for a moment to watch them, remembering when he himself was a child running through those same streets. Time, he thought, is the only mailman who never rests. It was then that he saw him. In a corner of the Central Park, away from the bustle of the other children, there was a little boy sitting on a weathered wooden bench. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His clothes were clean but mended in several places. His shoes showed holes that revealed worn socks, and his jet-black hair fell disheveled over his forehead. But what most caught Don Sebastian's attention were his eyes. They were large, dark as night, and looked toward the horizon with a mixture of hope and sadness that the mailman knew all too well. The boy held a piece of paper and a small pencil in his hands, drawing with absolute concentration. From time to time, he would look up toward the road leading to the town entrance, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Don Sebastian felt his heart tighten. He had seen that boy before, always in the same place, always with the same expression of waiting. His name was Mateo, and he was the son of Rosa, a woman who worked cleaning houses in neighboring towns. Mateo's father had left when the boy was barely 2 years old, leaving behind empty promises and a broken heart. Rosa did everything possible to support her son, but the days were long and money scarce. Matteo spent his afternoons alone, waiting for his mother to return from work, dreaming of a different world through his drawings. The mailman slowly approached the bench where the boy was sitting. His footsteps on the dry leaves crunched softly, announcing his arrival. Matteo looked up, and his eyes met those of the old mailman. "Good morning, little one," Don Sebastian greeted with a soft voice. "What are you drawing today?" Matteo looked at him with some distrust, as children do who have learned too soon that the world isn't always kind. But there was something in the mailman's gaze that conveyed trust, something warm, like the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds. "A house," the boy replied in a low voice, "with a big yard and flowers of all colors." Don Sebastian sat on the other end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. He looked at the boy's drawing and smiled. It was a simple house, with large windows and a chimney from which smoke emerged. In the yard there were figures that appeared to be people, though the strokes were clumsy as only a child's can be. "It's very beautiful," said the mailman sincerely. "Who are those people in the yard?" Matteo hesitated a moment before responding. "That's my mom." He pointed to a figure with long hair. "And that's me. And that—" His voice broke slightly. "That's my dad. He's coming home." Don Sebastian felt something break inside him. He knew that story too well. Fathers who left promising to return, mothers who waited for letters that never came, children who grew up drawing families that only existed in their dreams. "How long have you been waiting for your dad?" the mailman asked delicately. Matteo shrugged, as if the question were too big for his small shoulders. "My mom says he's working far away, that one day he'll come back with money to buy us a big house. But I think—" the boy lowered his voice to a whisper, "I think he forgot about us." The words fell on Don Sebastian like stones in a pond, creating ripples that expanded to all corners of his heart. How many farewell letters had he delivered? How many times had he seen hope die in the eyes of those waiting for news that never came? "You know something, Matteo?" said the mailman after a long silence. "I've been delivering letters for more than 40 years. I've seen everything, love letters, farewell letters, letters that changed lives forever, but there's something I've learned in all this time." The boy looked at him with curiosity, his large, dark eyes shining with a spark of interest. "What?" "That the most important letters don't always come in envelopes. Sometimes the most valuable letters are written in gestures, in glances, in the small acts of love we do every day. Your mum writes you a letter every time she prepares your breakfast, every time she tucks you in at night, every time she works hard to give you a better future." Matteo seemed to reflect on those words. His hands stopped moving on the paper, and his gaze was lost somewhere on the horizon. "But I want a real letter," he murmured. "A letter that's just for me. That says my name." Don Sebastian felt the weight of the envelope in his inner pocket. "For whoever needs it most." Guy, could this be the answer he had been looking for all morning? "Tell me something, little one," said the mailman with a trembling voice. "If you could receive a letter from anyone in the world, what would you like it to say?" Matteo thought for a moment, biting his lower lip as children do when they're concentrating on something important. "I'd like it to say that I'm important, that someone thinks about me, that I'm not alone in the world." Tears threatened to spring from the old mailman's eyes. In all his life, he had never heard words so simple and so profound at the same time. This boy, with his mended clothes and his paper dreams, had just summarized what all human beings seek in the depths of their hearts, the certainty that we matter, that someone remembers us, that we're not invisible in this vast universe. Don Sebastian put his hand in his pocket and took out the yellowed envelope. He held it in front of him for several seconds, feeling its weight, its texture, its mystery, and then, with a certainty born from the deepest part of his being, he knew exactly what he had to do. "Matteo," said the mailman with a solemn voice, "today I have a very special delivery, A letter that has traveled a long time to find the right person. The boy's eyes opened wide. A letter? For him? Is it for me? He asked with a trembling voice, not daring to believe it. Look at what it says here. Don Sebastian pointed to the inscription on the envelope. For whoever needs it most. And you know what, little one? I believe that person is you. Matteo took the envelope with trembling hands, as if he were touching something sacred. He turned it several times, examining it from all angles, feeling the texture of the ancient paper under his small fingers. Can I open it? He asked in a whisper. It's yours. Don Sebastian replied. You can do whatever you want with it. The boy slid his finger under the envelope flap with infinite care, as if he feared breaking something irreparable. Inside was a sheet of paper folded in 3 parts, written with the same elegant calligraphy as the outside. Matteo unfolded it slowly and began to read aloud, his lips moving with effort over the words. To whoever finds this letter. If you're reading these words, it's because fate has decided that you were the one who should receive them. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what battles you're fighting. What matters is that you know this. You are stronger than you think. You are more valuable than you imagine. You are more loved than you can see. Life sometimes puts difficult tests in our way. It makes us walk through dark and lonely paths. It makes us believe we're alone, that no one understands us, that our dreams are too big for this small world. But it's not true. Somewhere there's always someone thinking about you, someone who wishes for your happiness even if they don't know how to show it, someone who prays for you every night, even if they've never told you, someone who watches you from afar and feels proud of the person you are. Don't give up. Never give up. Grey days pass, storms move away, and always, always the sun comes out after the darkest night. This letter has no signature because it belongs to everyone and to no one. It's from whoever wrote it long ago, from whoever found it afterward, from whoever delivered it with love. And now it's yours. It's your reminder that you matter, that your existence has a purpose, that the world is better because you're in it. Keep it close to your heart, and when you feel hope abandoning you, read it again. Words have the power to heal, to give strength, to remind us who we are when we forget. With all the love in the universe, someone who believes in you. Matteo finished reading with eyes full of tears. His hands trembled as he held the paper, and his small chest rose and fell with choppy breaths. Never before had he received a letter. Never before had anyone told him he was important, that he was valuable, that he was loved. Don Sebastian watched the boy in silence, feeling his own eyes moisten. In more than 4 decades of service, he had delivered thousands and thousands of letters, but no delivery had felt as right as this one. None had filled his heart with so much peace. "Are you okay, little one?" asked the mailman gently. Matteo didn't respond with words. Instead, he got up from the bench and threw himself into the old mailman's arms, hugging him with all the strength his small body could muster. Don Sebastian felt the boy's tears soaking his blue jacket and couldn't help his own from beginning to fall. They stayed like that for several minutes, the old man and the boy, united by an embrace that transcended words. Around them, the autumn leaves fell gently, the sun filtered through the tree branches, and the world seemed to have stopped to witness that moment of pure humanity. "Thank you," Matteo finally whispered, pulling away from the embrace. "Thank you, Mr. Mailman." Don Sebastian," said the old man with a smile. "My name is Don Sebastian, and you don't have to thank me for anything. That letter was destined to find you." From that day on, something changed in San Isidro del Valle. Don Sebastian began to pass by the park every afternoon after finishing his delivery route. He would sit next to Matteo on the wooden bench and listen to his stories, his dreams, his concerns. Sometimes they talked for hours, Other times they simply sat in silence, enjoying each other's company. Matteo showed him his drawings, which became more elaborate each day, more full of color and hope. He no longer drew just the house with the absent father. Now he drew the park, the trees, the pigeons pecking at breadcrumbs, and always, he included the figure of an older man in a blue uniform, his friend, the mailman. And if you too have ever waited for a letter that changed your life, tell me about it in the comments. Rosa, Matteo's mother, noticed the change in her son. The boy, who used to spend his afternoons alone and silent now, came home with stories to tell, with smiles to share, with a light in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. One day Rosa decided to go to the park to meet this mailman her son talked about so much. She found him sitting next to Matteo. The two bent over a storybook that Don Sebastian had brought from his own collection. "You must be the famous mailman," said Rosa with a shy smile. "My son doesn't stop talking about you." Don Sebastian stood up with some difficulty, his old knees protesting the movement. "And you must be this brave little one's mother," the mailman replied, shaking Rosa's hand. "You have a wonderful son, ma'am. You must be very proud." Rosa felt tears wanting to spring from her eyes, but she held them back. She wasn't used to receiving compliments or to anyone speaking well of her son. "I do what I can," she murmured. "It's not easy, but—" "I know," Don Sebastian interrupted gently. "I know it's not easy, but believe me when I tell you that you're doing an extraordinary job. Matteo is a special boy. He has a pure heart and a limitless imagination. He just needs someone to believe in him." Rosa couldn't hold back the tears any longer. For years she had struggled alone, feeling invisible, wondering if she was doing things right, fearing that her son would grow up with the same wounds she carried. And now, this stranger, this old mailman with kind eyes, was telling her exactly what she needed to hear. "Thank you," said Rosa with a broken voice. "You don't know how much your words mean." Don Sebastian smiled, that warm smile that had comforted so many people over the years. "Words have power, Mrs. Rosa. They can build or destroy. They can heal or hurt. I chose long ago to use mine to plant hope. It's the only thing this old mailman knows how to do." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The friendship between Don Sebastian and Matteo grew stronger with each meeting. The mailman taught the boy to read better, sharing with him the books from his modest personal library. He told him stories of his youth, of the trips he had dreamed of taking but never made, of the people he had met through the letters he delivered. Matteo, for his part, gave him back something Don Sebastian thought he had lost long ago, the ability to see the world with eyes of wonder. The boy found magic in the simplest things, in the flight of a butterfly, in the reflection of the sun on a puddle of water, in the shapes of clouds passing over the town. "Don Sebastian," Matteo asked one afternoon as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, "do you have family?" The mailman kept silent for a moment, his eyes lost in some distant memory. "I had a wife," he finally replied. "Her name was Esperanza, same as what we need most in this life. She died 15 years ago, one winter night. We never had children, though we desired them with all our hearts." "I'm sorry," Matteo murmured, moving closer to the mailman. "Don't be sorry, little one. Esperanza gave me 30 years of happiness, and although she's no longer here, I feel her with me every day. In the aroma of coffee in the mornings, in the singing of birds, in the stars that shine at night. True love never dies. It just changes form." Matteo reflected on those words. Despite his young age, he understood more than many adults could imagine. His father's absence had taught him too soon that people could leave, that love wasn't always enough to keep someone by your side. "And don't you feel lonely?" asked the boy. Don Sebastian smiled, running his wrinkled hand through the little one's messy hair. I felt lonely until I met you. Now I have a friend who waits for me every afternoon on this bench. How could I feel lonely?" Matteo's eyes shone with a new light. No one had ever told him he was important to someone, that his presence made a difference in another person's life. "You're my friend too, Don Sebastian. My best friend." The mailman felt his old heart fill with a warmth he thought forgotten. In all his years of service, he had dedicated his life to connecting people through letters, but he never imagined that at the end of the road it would be a 7-year-old boy who would remind him what truly mattered. One December morning, when the cold was beginning to bite the town streets and the first frosts covered the rooftops with white frost, Don Sebastian didn't appear in the park. Matteo waited for hours, his small hands numb from the cold, his eyes fixed on the road where the mailman always arrived, but Don Sebastian didn't come. The next day, Matteo waited again, and the next, and the next. Every afternoon, he sat on the same bench, with the yellowed letter tucked in his coat pocket, praying for his friend to appear with his blue uniform and his worn leather bag. Rosa noticed the sadness that enveloped her son like a shadow. She tried to console him, promising him that the mailman was surely sick and would soon recover. But deep in her heart, she too feared the worst. It was Mrs. Carmen, the baker, who finally gave them the news. Don Sebastian had suffered a heart attack while sorting the morning mail. The paramedics had arrived in time to save him, but the old mailman was very weak. The doctor said he would need weeks of rest, perhaps months. When Matteo heard the news, he felt the world crumbling around him. His friend, his best friend, was in the hospital fighting for his life, and he could do nothing to help him. That night, Matteo couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling of his small room, thinking about all the conversations he had had with Don Sebastian, about all the moments they had shared. And then he had an idea. If the mailman had given him a letter that changed his life, maybe he could do the same. The next morning, Matteo got up before dawn. He took his sharpest pencil and his cleanest paper and sat down to write. The words didn't come easily. His small hand trembled and the letters came out crooked. But he didn't give up. For hours he worked on that letter, erasing and rewriting until he was finally satisfied. "Dear Don Sebastian, I'm Matteo, your friend from the park. They told me you're in the hospital and that you're very sick. I want you to know that I'm thinking about you every day and that I miss you very much. You gave me a letter that said I'm important, that I'm valuable, that I'm loved. Now I want you to know the same. You are the kindest person I know. You listen to me when I talk. You understand me when I'm sad, and you make me laugh when I feel like crying. Before I met you, I thought I was alone in the world. But you taught me that there's always someone who cares about us, even if we don't see them. Please don't give up. Grey days pass, storms move away, and the sun always comes out after the darkest night. You taught me that. I love you very much, Don Sebastian, and I'll be waiting for you on our bench every day until you can come back. Your friend, Matteo." The boy folded the letter with infinite care and put it in an envelope he had gotten at the town store. In his best handwriting, he wrote on the outside, "For Don Sebastian, the best mailman in the world." But a problem arose. Matteo didn't know how to get the letter to the hospital. He was just a 7-year-old boy with no money and no way to travel to the city where his friend was hospitalized. It was then that Rosa demonstrated the power of a mother's love. Seeing the determination in her son's eyes, she knew she had to help him. She spoke with her employers, asked for an unpaid day off, and took Matteo by bus to the hospital. The trip lasted more than 2 hours, through winding roads and small towns that Matteo only knew by name. The boy looked out the window with a mixture of nervousness and hope, pressing the envelope against his chest as if it were a treasure. When they arrived at the hospital, Rosa asked at reception for Don Sebastian. The nurse looked at them with curiosity, seeing the small boy with the envelope in hand, but indicated the room number. They walked through white corridors that smelled of disinfectant and medicine. Matteo had never been in a hospital, and everything seemed huge and intimidating. But he didn't let go of the letter, nor did he slow his pace. He had a mission to fulfill. When they reached the door of the room, Matteo felt his heart beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. What if Don Sebastian didn't want to see him? What if he was too sick to receive visitors? What if... Rosa took her son's hand and squeezed it gently. "I'm here with you," she whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." Matteo took a deep breath and pushed the door. The room was small and bright, with a window overlooking an interior garden. And there, in the bed, connected to machines that emitted constant beeps, was Don Sebastian. His face looked paler than Matteo remembered. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was soft and measured. For a moment, Matteo thought his friend was asleep. But then, as if he had sensed his presence, Don Sebastian opened his eyes. And when he saw the boy standing in the doorway, with an envelope in hand and tears in his eyes, his face lit up with the biggest smile Matteo had ever seen. "Matteo," whispered the mailman, with a weak but joyful voice, "my little friend." The boy ran to the bed and took the old man's hand in his. It was cold and fragile, like a sheet of ancient paper, but Matteo held it with all the love his small heart could contain. "I brought you a letter," said the boy, tears running freely down his cheeks. "It's for you." Don Sebastian took the envelope with trembling hands. He looked at it for several seconds, reading the inscription Matteo had written so carefully. "For Don Sebastian, the best mailman in the world." "May I read it?" asked the old man, his voice barely a whisper. "It's yours," Matteo replied. "You can do whatever you want with it." With slow and careful movements, Don Sebastian opened the envelope and took out the letter. His eyes, clouded by age and emotion, travelled over the words written by the boy. And as he read, tears began to fall down his wrinkled cheeks. "You are the kindest person I know. You taught me that there's always someone who cares about us. I love you very much, Don Sebastian." When he finished reading, the old mailman couldn't speak. Emotions crowded in his chest, too intense to express with words. In all his life, he had delivered thousands of letters, but this one, written by a 7-year-old boy with trembling handwriting and a pure heart, was the most valuable he had ever received. "Come here, little one," Don Sebastian finally said, opening his arms as much as the tubes and cables allowed. Matteo leaned over the bed and hugged his friend gently, fearing to hurt him. But Don Sebastian held him with a strength that seemed impossible for such a weak man. In that embrace was contained everything: gratitude, love, the promise to keep fighting. "I'm going back to the park," the mailman whispered in the boy's ear. "I promise you, I won't give up." Matteo smiled through tears. "Grey days pass," he said, repeating the words from the letter, "and the sun always comes out." Don Sebastian laughed softly, a laugh that turned into a cough but didn't lose its warmth. "You learn fast, little mailman." Rosa watched the scene from the doorway, tears running silently down her face. In that moment, she understood something that would change her perspective forever. Love isn't measured by the blood we share, but by the bonds we choose to create. Don Sebastian wasn't Matteo's family, but he had done more for her son than the biological father who had abandoned them years earlier. The doctors came in shortly after to do their checkups. They said Don Sebastian needed to rest, that visits should be brief. But before leaving, the old mailman took Rosa's hand. "Thank you," he told her sincerely. "Thank you for raising this wonderful boy, and thank you for bringing him here." Rosa squeezed the old man's hand. "You're the one who deserves the thanks. You've been more of a father to Matteo than anyone ever has." Don Sebastian shook his head. "I'm not his father. I'm his friend, and sometimes that's even more valuable." The return trip to San Isidro was different. Matteo looked out the bus window with a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew Don Sebastian was going to get better. He felt it in his heart with a certainty that defied all logic. And he was right. 3 weeks later, when the first snows of winter covered the town in white, Don Sebastian returned to San Isidro del Valle. He didn't return to work as a mailman. The doctors were clear that his body could no longer withstand the long walks and physical effort. But every afternoon, without fail, he sat on the park bench to wait for his little friend. Matteo ran to him every day after school, with new drawings to show, new stories to tell, new dreams to share. And Don Sebastian listened to him with the same attention as always, with that warm gaze that made the boy feel he was the most important person in the world. Months passed, and with them came changes. Rosa found a better-paying job in town, which allowed her to spend more time with her son. Matteo began to excel at school, especially in writing and drawing. And Don Sebastian, although he no longer delivered letters, found a new way to use his gift to connect people. He began teaching the town's children to write letters. Every Saturday morning, a small group of kids would gather at his house to learn the art he had dedicated his life to. He taught them to choose the right words, to express emotions clearly, to give power to phrases. But above all, he taught them that letters were more than paper and ink. They were bridges between hearts, invisible bonds that united people across time and distance. Matteo was his most dedicated student. He learned to write with elegant calligraphy, to structure his thoughts, to bring words to life. And little by little, he began to write letters not only for Don Sebastian, but for other people in town, for Mrs. Carmen, thanking her for the sweets she always gave him, for his teacher, telling her how much he appreciated her patience, for his mother, expressing all the love that was sometimes hard for him to say aloud. 1 year after the day he received that mysterious letter, Matteo had an idea that would change not only his life, but that of the entire town. He approached Don Sebastian with a special sparkle in his eyes. "I have a proposal," said the boy solemnly. "I want to create the Lost Letters Club." Don Sebastian looked at him with curiosity. "And what would that be, little one?" "A place where anyone can leave a letter for whoever needs it most, like the letter you gave me. Letters without names, without addresses, letters that reach the right hands by fate." The old mailman felt his heart swell with pride. This boy, who a year ago sat alone on a bench dreaming of a family he would never have, now wanted to give hope to others. "I think it's a wonderful idea," said Don Sebastian. "And where would you propose putting these letters?" Matteo smiled, that smile that lit up his entire face. "In the park, on our bench. We could put a wooden box where people leave the letters, and anyone who needs it can take one." And so the Lost Letters Club of San Isidro del Valle was born. Don Sebastian built the box with his own hands, even though they trembled and no longer had the strength of before. It was an oak wood box, polished with love, with an inscription carved on the lid, "For whoever needs it most." They placed it next to the bench where it all began, and from the first day, the townspeople began leaving letters. Some were long, full of advice and words of encouragement. Others were brief, barely a few lines that nevertheless contained all the power of human love. There were letters from elderly people who wanted to share their wisdom, from parents who wrote for children they never had, from lonely people who found in words a way to connect with the world. And there were also those who came to take letters. People going through difficult times, who had lost hope, who needed someone to remind them they weren't alone. They arrived at the park with sad eyes and left with a smile, holding a yellowed envelope as if it were the most valuable treasure in the universe. The fame of the Lost Letters Club spread beyond San Isidro. Journalists came to do reports, curious people came from neighboring towns to see the magic box, and even a television channel made a documentary about the old mailman and the boy who had started it all. But Don Sebastian and Matteo didn't care about fame. What mattered to them was the change they saw every day, people who arrived defeated and left with hope, the bonds that formed between strangers, the lives that were transformed thanks to simple words written on paper. One spring afternoon, when flowers were once again filling the town's gardens and the air smelled of new beginnings, Matteo came running to the park with news that would change everything. "Don Sebastian! Don Sebastian!" shouted the boy, waving an envelope in the air. "A letter arrived! A letter for me!" The old mailman looked up from the book he was reading. He no longer moved with the agility of before and spent most of his time sitting on the bench, enjoying the sun and his young friend's company. But seeing the excitement on Matteo's face, he felt his own heart accelerate. A letter? From whom? Matteo dropped onto the bench, breathing heavily. He held the envelope against his chest, not yet daring to open it. "I don't know. It has no return address. It only says my name, my full name, Don Sebastian, Matteo Alejandro Reyes." Don Sebastian felt a chill run down his back. Could it be? "Open it, little one," he said with a soft voice. "Letters are meant to be read." Matteo nodded and, with trembling hands, opened the envelope. Inside were 2 sheets written in a calligraphy the boy didn't recognize. He began to read aloud, his voice breaking with each word. "My dear Matteo, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand. I understand it more than I can express with words. I abandoned you when you were just a baby, leaving you with a mother who had to carry alone a weight we should have shared. There's no excuse for what I did. There's no justification that erases the pain I caused you. I left because I was a coward. I was afraid of responsibility, afraid of not being enough, afraid of failing. And by running away, I made the biggest mistake of my life. A mistake I've paid for every day during these 7 years, waking in darkness, wondering what you'll be like, if you inherited your mother's eyes, if you like chocolate ice cream like me. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not writing to ask for a second chance. I know I have no right. I'm writing because I needed you to know something I should have told you from the moment you were born. You are my greatest pride. Not for anything you've done, but simply for existing. From a distance, I've followed your life through people in town who still talk to me. I know you're a good boy, intelligent, with a heart so big it doesn't fit in your small chest. I know you helped create something beautiful, that Lost Letters Club everyone talks about. I know you have a very special friend, an old mailman who loves you like the grandson he never had. I'm not asking you for anything, Matteo. I just want you to know that although I wasn't present, although I failed in every possible way, I've loved you every second of every day since I knew you existed, and I'll keep loving you until the last breath of my life. If someday you want to meet me, if someday you decide you can give me the opportunity to look you in the eyes and ask for your forgiveness in person, I'll be waiting. I live in the city of Monterey on Orange Street, number 47. But if you never want to see me, I'll understand. I just hope this letter finds you well, that you're happy, that you have everything I couldn't give you. With all the love of a father who didn't know how to be one, Rafael Reyes. The silence that followed the reading was as dense as dawn fog. Matteo held the letter with trembling hands, his eyes fixed on the words he had just read. Don Sebastian remained motionless, not knowing what to say, what to do, how to help his little friend process what he had just received. Finally, Matteo spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, fragile as glass. He wrote to me, after all this time. He wrote to me. Don Sebastian nodded slowly. "And how do you feel, little one?" Matteo thought for a long moment. His emotions were a whirlwind he could barely understand. Rage for the years of absence, sadness for what could have been, confusion at this unexpected opening, and something more. Something he didn't expect to feel. Hope. "I don't know," the boy admitted. "I spent so much time hating him, wishing he would come back, then wishing I'd never known him. And now this." Don Sebastian put his hand on Matteo's shoulder. "You don't have to decide anything now. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Some decisions need time to mature like fruit on a tree." "What would you do?" asked Matteo, seeking in the mailman's eyes the wisdom he had always found there. Don Sebastian sighed deeply. "I'm an old man who has seen much in this life. I've seen repentant people who truly changed, and I've seen others who only pretended to get what they wanted. I can't tell you which one your father is, because I don't know him. What I can tell you is this. Forgiveness isn't something you give because the other person deserves it. It's something you give because you need it. Carrying resentment is like carrying a heavy stone in your pocket. It only hurts you." Matteo nodded, absorbing the words. "But what if I go see him and he disappoints me again?" "Then you'll have learned something important, and you'll move forward, as you always have. But there's also the possibility that he won't disappoint you. The possibility that you'll find something you didn't know you were looking for." The boy looked at the letter once more. His father's words seemed sincere, but how could he be sure? How could he trust someone who had abandoned him? "I have to talk to my mom," he finally said. "This affects her, too." Don Sebastian smiled with pride. "That's a very mature decision, little one. Your mother deserves to know what happened." That night, Matteo sat with Rosa in the small kitchen of their house. He showed her the letter, watching as his mother's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, pain, anger, and finally, something like resignation. "I always knew this day would come," Rosa murmured. "I hoped it wouldn't. But deep down, I knew that eventually Raphael would try to contact you." "Are you angry, Mom?" Rosa took her son's hands in hers. "I was angry for a long time, whole years dedicated to hating your father for what he did to us. But hatred is exhausting, mijo. And at some point I had to let it go to be able to keep living." "What should I do?" asked Matteo. Rosa looked at him with all the love a mother can feel. "That's something only you can decide. I'm not going to tell you to go see him, but I'm also not going to forbid it. The only thing I ask is that whatever you do it for yourself. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, not because of what others think. For yourself." Matteo nodded, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders, but he also felt something more: his mother's unconditional support, Don Sebastian's wisdom, and the certainty that, whatever happened, he wasn't alone. Several weeks passed before Matteo made a decision. During that time, he reread his father's letter dozens of times, looking for clues, trying to decipher the true intentions behind the words. He talked with Don Sebastian almost every day, processing his emotions, exploring his fears. And finally, one summer morning, Matteo knew what he had to do. "I'm going to go see him," he told Don Sebastian. "Not to forgive him yet, but to listen to him, to look him in the eyes and understand." The old mailman nodded solemnly. "It's a brave decision, little one. Do you want me to come with you?" Matteo shook his head. "It's something I have to do alone." "Well, not alone. My mum will come with me. But I need to face him myself, look at that man, and decide if he deserves a place in my life." Don Sebastian hugged the boy tightly. "I'm proud of you, Matteo, prouder than words can express." The trip to Monterey was long and full of silences. Rosa drove the old car she had bought with her savings, while Matteo looked out the window, watching the landscapes pass that were taking him toward the unknown. When they arrived at Orange Street, Mateo's heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. The houses were modest but well kept, with small gardens and flower pots in the windows. Number 47 was a white house with blue doors, and on the porch was a man sitting in a rocking chair. Rafael Reyes had the same dark eyes as Mateo, the same black hair now sprinkled with grey, the same jawline. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected the future. When he saw the car arrive, Rafael jumped up, his eyes filled with tears, recognizing Rosa and, above all, the boy getting out of the vehicle with determined steps. "Mateo," he whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "You came." Mateo stopped a few meters from his father. He studied him in silence, looking in his face for the answers he needed. Was this the man who had abandoned him? Was this the father he had dreamed of for years? "I came to listen to you," the boy finally said. "I don't promise anything more." Rafael nodded, tears running freely down his cheeks. "It's more than I deserve. Thank you, son. Thank you." What followed was a conversation of hours. Sitting in the small garden of the house, with Rosa present as a silent witness, Rafael told his story. He talked about the fear that had paralyzed him when he found out he was going to be a father, about the bad decisions that led him to flee, about the years of regret and shame that kept him away. He talked about sleepless nights, about photos of Mateo he got secretly, about the pain of knowing his son was growing up without him. Mateo listened in silence, processing each word. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he wanted to scream, when he wanted to get up and leave to never return. But there were also moments when he saw sincerity in his father's eyes, genuine regret, the desperate desire to make amends for what he had done. When they finished talking, the sun had already set and the first stars were appearing in the Monterey sky. "I can't forgive you yet," said Mateo honestly. "Maybe I never can forgive you completely. But I'm willing to try to get to know you, to give you a chance to prove that you've changed." Rafael closed his eyes, tears overflowing once more. "It's all I ask, son. All I ask." The return to San Isidro was different from the outbound journey. Mateo was still silent, but it was a different silence. It wasn't loaded with anxiety or fear, but with reflection, with a tentative peace that was beginning to flourish in his heart. Don Sebastian was waiting for them in the park, sitting on the usual bench. When he saw Mateo arrive, his face lit up with a smile. "How did it go, little one?" Mateo sat next to his friend and sighed deeply. "It was difficult, very difficult. But I think I did the right thing. I'm going to give my father a chance. Not because he asked me to, but because I need to. I need to know if he can be part of my life, or if I have to close that door forever." Don Sebastian nodded wisely. "Whatever the outcome, you've shown extraordinary courage. Many adults aren't capable of doing what you did today." Mateo looked at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to shine. "You know something, Don Sebastian. I think letters have more power than we think. One letter changed my life when you delivered it to me. Another letter brought me back to my father. Maybe the world would be a better place if we all wrote more letters to each other." The old mailman smiled, that smile that had comforted so many people for so many years. "Maybe you're right, little one. Maybe you're absolutely right." The following years brought changes that no one could have predicted. Rafael moved to a town near San Isidro, close enough to see his son regularly, but without invading the life Mateo had built. Slowly, with infinite patience, father and son began to know each other. There were difficult moments, arguments, tears, but there were also laughs, discoveries, bonds that strengthened with each meeting. Rosa, against all odds, found within herself the capacity to forgive. It wasn't easy or quick, but eventually she could look at Rafael without feeling the rage that had consumed her for years. They didn't get back together as a couple, but they learned to be shared parents, to put their son's needs above their own wounds. The Lost Letters Club continued to grow. What began as a wooden box on a park bench became a movement that spread throughout the country. Other towns created their own versions, inspired by the story of San Isidro. Letters traveled from hand to hand, bringing hope to those who needed it most. Don Sebastian lived to see all this. Despite his age and ailments, he remained firm, like an oak that has withstood 1,000 storms. Every afternoon, without fail, he sat on the park bench to wait for Matteo, and every afternoon the young man came running with new stories to tell, because Matteo was no longer a child. The years had transformed him into a tall, strong young man, with the same dreamy gaze, but now accompanied by an unshakable determination. He had finished school with honors and was studying to become a teacher. He wanted to teach other children to write, to express themselves, to find in words the power he had discovered thanks to a yellowed letter. One autumn afternoon, 10 years after that day that changed everything, Matteo arrived at the park with an envelope in hand. Don Sebastian was no longer the robust man of before. Now he was a fragile old man, with completely white hair and eyes veiled by cataracts. But his smile was still the same, warm and comforting. "I have something for you," said Matteo, sitting next to his friend. Don Sebastian looked at the envelope with curiosity. "Another letter?" "A very special letter. I wrote it for you, but I want to read it to you myself." The young man opened the envelope and began to read, his voice firm but loaded with emotion. "Dear Don Sebastian, 10 years ago, you delivered me a letter that changed my life. At that moment, I was a lonely boy who believed no one loved him, that he had been forgotten by the world. You taught me I was wrong. Throughout these years, you've been my friend, my teacher, my guide. You taught me that words have power, that true love never dies, that there's always hope even when the world seems dark. You gave me something my own father didn't know how to give me, the certainty that I matter. I have no way to thank you for everything you've done for me. There aren't enough words, there aren't gestures big enough, but I can do one thing. I can promise you that I'll honor your legacy, that I'll keep writing letters, delivering hope, connecting hearts, that the Lost Letters Club will live as long as I live. And I can tell you something more, something I should have told you long ago. I love you, Don Sebastian, not as you love a friend or a teacher. I love you as you love a grandfather, a father, someone who forms part of the deepest part of your being. Thank you for finding me that day in the park. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for being you. With all the love in my heart, your little mailman, Matteo." When he finished reading, Matteo looked up and saw that Don Sebastian was crying in silence. Tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks, but his smile was the most luminous the young man had ever seen. "Come here, little one," whispered the old man, using the same term he had used since the first day. Matteo leaned over and hugged Don Sebastian with all the tenderness he was capable of. He felt the old man's fragile bones under his arms, the measured breathing, the heart that beat slower and slower. "I love you, son," murmured Don Sebastian. "I've loved you since the first moment I saw you on that bench. You were the light I didn't know I was looking for. They stayed like that for a long time, the old man and the young man, united by a bond that transcended blood and time. Around them, the world kept turning. Children played in the park, autumn leaves fell gently, the sun began its descent toward the horizon. But for them, time had stopped. Don Sebastian passed away that same night while he slept. The doctors said his heart simply stopped beating, like an old clock that finally runs out of spring. But Matteo knew the truth. Don Sebastian had waited to hear that letter, to know that his legacy was in good hands, and once he knew it, he could leave in peace. The funeral was a celebration of life more than a mourning. The entire town of San Isidro gathered to say goodbye to the man who had dedicated his existence to connecting hearts. There were speeches, songs, tears, and laughter, remembering the countless anecdotes of the old mailman. Matteo spoke last. He stood before the crowd, holding in his hands the worn leather bag that Don Sebastian had used for 43 years. "Don Sebastian taught me many things," he began, his voice firm despite the tears. "He taught me to read, to write, to dream. But above all, he taught me that true love never dies. It just changes form." He looked toward the sky where the clouds were opening to let through a ray of sun. "Wherever he is now, I know he's still delivering letters. Maybe he's carrying messages between the stars, connecting souls in the other world as he did in this one. And I know that, when my time comes to depart, he'll be waiting for me, with his blue uniform and his warm smile, ready to show me the way." He paused, feeling the weight of the leather bag in his hands. "Today I don't say goodbye to Don Sebastian, because he lives in every letter we write, in every word of hope we share, in every heart we connect with another. The Lost Letters Club is his legacy, and as long as it exists, he'll remain with us. If this story accompanied you today, give us a like and share this tale with someone who needs a ray of hope." Years later, Matteo became the new guardian of the Lost Letters Club. He expanded the initiative, creating programs for schools, hospitals, nursing homes. Letters traveled throughout the country, bringing comfort to those who needed it. He married a teacher from the town school, a sweet woman named Eleanor, who shared his passion for words. They had 2 children, whom they told stories about the old mailman, who one day changed the life of a lonely boy. The original wooden box remained on the park bench, now protected by a small pergola that the town hall had built. Thousands of letters had passed through it, each carrying its own story of hope and connection. And on autumn afternoons, when the wind carried dry leaves and the sun painted the sky orange and gold, the inhabitants of San Isidro swore they saw 2 figures sitting on the bench, a boy with large eyes and an old man in a blue uniform, talking like old friends, connected by something stronger than time itself, because true love never dies, it just changes form.